Welcome to SASS, a podcast where science meets spirituality with a little bit of sass, your guide to awakening with a twist. I'm Katie Kovaleski, your host, and I look forward to helping you on your awakening journey. I've been a marriage and family therapist for almost 11 years and have been specializing in holistic self-care tools for the last 5. I found that healing and growth are optimized when mind, body, and spirit tools are combined with cognitive behavior and solution-focused therapeutic techniques, creating sustainable change that can be easy and fun. All of our podcasts discuss science and spirituality and really talk about tools and topics that are imperative to the human awakening experience. We look forward to meeting you wherever you are, and welcome to SASS. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Kayla, who has been a client, colleague, and friend over the past few years. And we had such a good time doing this interview that we were able to divide it into 2 parts. And so today for part 1, she's going to be talking about her journey of awakening and what that means to her and the process that led her to the beginning of this path. Enjoy. Kayla and I have known each other, has it been like 2 years now?
I think so, yeah. About 2 years.
About 2 years. When she first came to one of the kind of mindfulness and self-care classes that I was teaching. And then we just kept working together in so many different capacities. And now I consider her to be a friend. And she's awesome. So I'm super glad to have you here today. So I'm going to let you do your full introduction. So name, occupation, and one thing that's lighting you up these days.
Oh boy. Okay, so my name is Kayla O'Brien. I'm a videographer and a new business owner. I just started my video production business called Kayla O'Brien Media, which is my name, with media at the end. Basically, I'm working to help businesses and entrepreneurs use video marketing in their business and storytelling, but it's also starting to open up to a bunch of other things like consulting and content creation. And it's just been kind of a fun journey so far to see where it can go and how many things I can do with video marketing as like the basis. But anyways, yeah, self-care has been a huge thing for me in the last couple of years. You know, I felt a few years ago that I didn't really think I had issues or a huge problem, but I just felt like something wasn't totally right. And I wanted something more, a little bit deeper. So when I came across Katie and you, I thought, well, let me see what happens and give it a try. What's the worst that can happen? I learned how to meditate a little bit and then I move on with my life. So when I got into it and started going to the classes and kind of being around people who were very open about some of the struggles they were going through, I just felt very at home and almost connected on a deeper level than I had been with other people who I considered really close friends. I mean, I was talking about things with these strangers really that I hadn't talked about with like my family, my friends, like they knew me deeper. So very quickly within those 6 weeks, I was like hooked and wanted to explore more and go deeper. And then, you know, Katie and I worked together on different projects and through self-care, and it's been ever expanding since then. And one thing that's lighting me up now, let me think, everything being virtual. I know Katie and I have discussed this a lot, you know, how many things can be virtual. And I worked for a startup where my boss lived in Seattle and I was in Orlando. So I've had a little bit of experience with working abroad and that sort of thing, where different time zones and whatnot. But it's so crazy how as a country and a society, we've like quantumly jumped in the last few months from, you know, things being in person and brick and mortar traditional to now everyone's on Zoom. Everyone knows how to live stream and use video and YouTube. And it's cool. And it's fun that average people now are excited about technology and communicating via the internet. So that's something fun I love to explore, especially lately.
Yeah, it has to be cool for you too. I would imagine if people are kind of teaching themselves a little bit, it like broadens like your ability to be creative with them when you're working with them, because it doesn't have to be so bottom up functioning. Like, okay, here's how you record something, or you need this, like chances are they might have a few more tricks in their tool bag because of it.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing. And I come from a journalism background, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit through our conversation today. But journalism was like the thing that they don't want to go on the internet. Like I worked for a newspaper, and the conversation every day was like, oh, the internet's so annoying. The internet sucks. Like we miss the paper. It's like, oh my God, like they didn't want to innovate whatsoever.
Yes.
So it was always convincing that, I was on the digital team, and it was convincing the reporters and the editors to give like a podcast a try to do some like posts on Facebook, for God's sakes, like something. And they're very resistant to change. They were like, it has to be on the front page of the paper or else it doesn't matter. And man, we're so far from that. Like, come on, it's 2020. Let's go.
Yeah. I'm thinking of all these cliches in my head because I coined today Cliche Friday. I decided to start like a thing about Cliche Friday because people say, and here's another cliche. Cliches are cliches for a reason, insinuating that they're true. And so often they're not true, but it's like, can't teach an old dog new tricks, or like necessity is the mother of invention. So with things like the paper, if they're ingrained to believe, and this is cool because we can tie it in to our conversation today about belief systems. If they're taught to believe something, that the Holy Grail is the front page of the paper, how is there a front page if it's on the intranet? What will we do? Can't even look at that. Nope. No. You have to go back to this. And it's like biting your nose off to spite your face. Like, well, we'll just go down in flames then, let our paper burn, because
I got into so many fights because of that, because, I was arguing with people who had been there in the same office since 1975. Oosh. And think about it. Like I was born in 91. I mean, I haven't done something consistently since 91. So think about doing something since 1975.
I don't want to every day. I don't ever want to do anything for that long.
Yeah. So then, changing your belief system in the last 5 years, it's impossible. Yeah. And so people would argue, I would be like, let's do this thing on Facebook or this thing. And it was like, well, the paper's paying your bills. You should appreciate the paper. And it's like, yeah, well, that's about to run out anytime soon. Like, how can you not see this like steamroller coming to like, shut everything down? But at some point, it's like, you got to understand where they're coming from. And
for sure. I know it would be
disagree.
Tough. Yeah. And not having the tools to change, but in hindsight, you're probably looking at them thinking like, oh, it's going to take an act of God, the force of nature. And then they got one. It's like pandemic. Okay. Exactly. Now we got to figure it out.
Maybe it didn't come by their own free will, but it came anyways.
Yeah, which is a good jumping off point for, I think, podcast topic, which is all about talking with people about their journey and their story of waking up and what it means. And so I always like to ask people what the term being awake or waking up means to them, and then start diving into their journey with it. Because there's typically a catalyst, I think, at some point where the bottom kind of drops out. And then through the journey forward, I think a lot of times we go back to figure out, oh, okay, a lot of what's happening is actually very familiar and it's been happening for a long time, and start deconstructing that. So what does waking up or being awake mean to you?
It means a lot of things, and it's changing all the time. But for me, it's realizing that we are more than our brains. And that was something that took me a long time to understand, because from my background, I've had anxiety, diagnosed panic disorder when I was like 7 years old. So I've been the type of person who's been very aware of how powerful the brain can be. Mm-hmm. And situations where, I was in a car going to school and my brain is telling me to jump out of the car, like you are in danger, like get out of the situation. And, as a child, you're like, oh, I don't know how to handle this information and why is it happening and all these things. But I knew that I was safe in one part of my brain. The other part of my brain is screaming to get out. So from a young age, I always felt like, okay, there's something going on here that's more than just what's in front of me, if that makes sense. And so through medication and therapy, when I was younger, I started to be able to handle it and live with anxiety and be okay, for the most part. But until the last couple years, I mean, I was always afraid that it could come back at any time. And it was just a coping mechanism in a way where I was, as long as I'm okay today, I'm okay. But tomorrow could be horrible again. And yesterday, I had a little incident, so I need to be careful. And I was never just comfortable. I always was afraid of, what was coming. And so waking up for me is realizing like that's always going to be a possibility. There's always going to be triggers, there's always going to be things that are happening, but that's not me. That is just something that happens to me sometimes and happens to a lot of people. And then it's not something that like, well, I'm born with it, can't do anything about it. This is what it is. It's like, no, like this is something that my higher being can learn to control and use different tactics to get through. So I know it's kind of like a weird kind of heady answer, but basically waking up to me is realizing that we're more than our situations as humans, as like this body that we're in, and that there's more involved, and that we're just kind of almost watching ourselves go through this experience, and that's who we truly are. The being watching us do the things we're doing.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And I think that's a really good summation. And I know in some of our other talks, we talked about like stages of waking up, and Kayla is at a pretty, I would say, advanced stage, because you get through so many stages and then you kind of just recycle. So you're going through like a hibernation and then new rebirths frequently. And so the base stages you've already gotten through. And so I think your summation of what it means to be awake is really great and spot on in identifying that we are not our minds and that we are something bigger, and we can observe our circumstances and our responses and then tailor them. And so that's been something really cool to watch you go through, because I remember, and I think we talked about this recently, a specific moment when we had been working together for a while and we were talking about how belief systems are formed in the subconscious mind, and how you can rebalance and rewire and literally change belief systems, which are driving your perception and your lens and the way that you see and experience reality, your reality. And you were kind of, I remember like looking at me, and there was this like light bulb moment, and you were like, this is a system. This is like a computer system, like hardware, and like you can upgrade it and replace it. And that's what's going to drive what happens and how you function. And I'm like, yes. And you're like, there's a whole system out here. Like this, people need to know this. I'm like, yes. And that is, I think, like the aha moment, at least for me, when I know people are really stepping into understanding what waking up looks like, when they're like, wait a second, everything isn't random and chaotic, and I'm not just in the moment responding to things and trying to keep a grasp on 1,000 different experiences and emotions. It's like, they're driven from this place. This is how they're created. Here's how we can change them. And I think with that, and I think I've seen with you, how much unpacking comes with that. So with that realization that there's a system there, it then draws a natural question of like, well, what are my belief systems and perceptions? Like, where did this voice in my head come from? And it's typically not our own. It's typically something we've adopted. So I wanted to kind of dive into that, because I've watched you move really quickly, which is a really good thing, impressive thing, from doing the inner work, connecting with yourself, understanding that you're not your mind, going through the awakening process of understanding that there's a system at work here and that you are in control of it. And then diving into, I think, restoring or going back into the past and saying, wait a second, there are so many things here that I had to, in order to survive, tell myself were normal and okay and acceptable, that in fact are not. And not acknowledging that isn't allowing me to move forward in the present the way that I want to. So I'd like you, if you want to kind of go back and talk to me about, where that started for you as a kid, and kind of what that process went through high school and college and adulthood, and then talk about how you kind of started to restructure it.
Yeah. So mental health has always been a conversation in our home growing up, because my dad has bipolar disorder or manic depressive. And it's always been a thing that I've known about since I was really young. And my parents, this is a great way to introduce how kind of weird my situation is. So my parents got married after I was born, but they had known each other since my mom was 19, my dad was like 22. And my mom was 32 and she had me. So a lot of years from when they started dating, met each other, to when they actually got married was like more than a decade. And then they got divorced when I was like 6. And then they got remarried, which I knew that they got remarried, but I didn't until like last month know that they were still married. So
Okay.
a lot of secrecy kind of, or don't ask, don't tell type of behavior had happened in my house, and I always felt like that was normal. Like, you
Yeah.
just don't ask your parents like if they're married or not, like that's not your business type
Mhm.
of thing. And I'm an only child, so there was no one else there in the house ever to ask like, wait, is this okay, like is this normal? So for me it was always like whatever my parents said was what I had to go with. I had no family other than them. I have family, technically, like biological family, like I have cousins and uncles and aunts, but both my parents were kind of the oddballs in their families, and they kind of found each other through that plight together, that they were kind of the weird ones in their own families. They met each other and felt a connection because of that. But also when I was born, my dad has like 4 siblings, my mom has 2. I have no relationship with any of them because they don't really have a relationship with them themselves. So I was really isolated in our family unit, and
You had no
kind
one
of
to like gut check or fact check reality. It was like, well,
exactly. And
okay.
if I ever did with my parents, it was like a disciplinary thing. If I would ask like, is this doesn't feel right, or act out, it was like punishment, like don't do that. Like don't ask questions. That's the best way to like survive this type of thing. And at the time you don't know. And when like I said earlier, like I had a disorder, really, really bad panic disorder young, when I was like 7. And it started from what I remember. It started, my dad had just left, just vanished one day. I went to school, my mom went to work, and we came back and his shit was gone. His like shit, razors and stuff, like he just took everything and went back to where he's from. And it was just like, don't talk about it, like he's gone, that's it.
Yeah.
And we're gonna make it through it. My mom was a very strong, independent woman, and she made sure that I never was hungry. We had everything that I needed, that we had a house, a roof over our head always. So I respect her for that. But it was also confusing as a kid, like what's going on, like what's happening. There's he's just gone all of a sudden. I had him since I was born and now he's gone. But we made it work. But all of a sudden, then like 2 years later, he just shows up again, just like on our doorstep, just like back. And within a couple weeks, he was living back in our house, and it was just like, oh, everything's back to normal again. And that's when I started to have my anxiety. I started to feel, when I was at school, like I would just stand up and like scream in the middle of the class. And before and after, I feel like I've always liked school. I've been a pretty decent student, like to be involved in activities. And that was just a weird time in my life where I couldn't focus. I was not doing my work. I was having like episodes where I was just like running out of the room or screaming and crying. And it was just like, what is going on here? So eventually I was taken out of school for a couple months back in like the 3rd grade. I mean, they were like, you can't have her in school when she's like acting like this every single day. So I was like homeschooled for a little bit. And during that time I had gone to like a child psychologist, and I had gotten on Prozac when I was like really young. And it helped, though. It really did. It helped me not panic to the extreme point where I was just, trying to rip my hair out and stuff. Like it was bad. And then through the medication and talking to somebody, it helped. And then it became, from that point on, like 3rd grade on, it became management. I would have feelings of panic, but then I would, okay, take a pill, or I would be like, calm myself down. I started to get really good at like talking to myself in my head, like, you're okay, you're fine, you're good. But I'm also growing up, and I'm also young, and I'm also dealing with the situation at home where my dad's in prison now, and he's in prison for 2 years, and how does that work? And when he gets out of prison, he's back in our house, and now I'm a teenager, and
Yeah.
things are a little bit different now, and it just, there was a lot of things going on. But I always felt like at the end of the day, I was very lucky in my situation. So there was these two dynamics. I'm very lucky to have all the things that I have in my life. I was never, I was lucky to have the chance to do sports. I was in tennis since I was young, and I got to do softball, and I got to like be involved in activities after school, and I was never like, told not to do that. So I always felt like I had friends and that sort of thing. But I also felt like all this weird stuff's going on at home, and I can't really talk to anyone about it because there's like a stigma against me having a mental disorder and illness, and also my dad having one. So it was like a weird, I was living two lives.
Yeah.
Like I was living this like, okay, I want to be popular. I want to be normal. I want to have a boyfriend. I want to do all these things that like teenagers and kids do. But I also have this stuff going on at home that I don't know why I can't talk about it, but I know I can't talk about it, with people. And I have to kind of hide it, and I have to kind of make it seem like, oh, no, it's fine. Or, yeah, my dad's like, we're at like a work trip or something, I just knew to lie about it, or I felt like it was the right thing to do, is to lie about it a lot of times, like with people. And it wasn't until I graduated from college that I felt comfortable talking about any of this. I didn't want people to think that I was weird, because I already felt weird. So
Yeah.
if I talked about it, then it was confirming that I was really weird, or that I know mental illness has a stigma. It's getting lessened every day, which I appreciate. And I'm glad people are being more open about it. But if you're crazy, that you're not taken seriously, or, they want you working at a company if you're crazy. So I always felt like I gotta like repress all this stuff that I'm dealing with, because I don't want people to think like there's something wrong with me, or I can't handle a situation. So anyways, so that was like kind of a rough jump around of my childhood. And then in college, so up until high school, on and off, my family life was kind of chaotic. I had been on and off of medication my whole life. And then in college, I had a thing where for like my dad had gone back to jail, and he had been in prison once, and he had gone to jail again for, I think it was like a DUI or something, not like related to his illness. But at that time, he was in New York State, and he ended up in a homeless shelter once he was released, because everyone was basically sick of dealing with him. His brothers, who would like take him in once in a while, they were done. They were like cutting him off. They couldn't deal with it anymore. His parents, my grandparents, had passed away. He didn't have their home anymore. So he was really on his own. And my mom was in Florida. She couldn't help him at that time. So he was in a homeless shelter. He was living there for like a month. And I had gone up to see him, and I was just in college. So I was like 19 maybe. And I was still pretty young, like a maturity level. Like I wasn't a mature 19-year-old. I was kind of like a teenager, just trying to figure it out, on my own. And seeing him, and I think just dealing with the stress of that, and trying to write it in my mind, like, I'm in college, I'm going to football games and living in a dorm. And then on the weekends, I'm going up to see my dad in a homeless shelter. That sort of thing. Like, I think I didn't realize how much it messed with my mind. But then all of a sudden, my anxiety went right back to where it started. And I was not sleeping. I was barely able to function. Again, same thing like happened when I was a kid. I was like going to class, but just like the whole time thinking like, I got to run out the door. I got to get out of here. Like, I can't be in this room. I got to sit by the back because I can't be in the middle. Like, and just getting like goosebumps. Like every time I would like think about having to be somewhere where I couldn't escape.
Yeah.
And so then I went and saw a psychologist again after a couple months of feeling like this, got on medication again. And I started to like, okay, I'm getting better. And then it maintained again. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I started making more friends and like kind of getting distracted and partying and doing all the stuff that, college kids do. and then started to work on my career and, got really busy. And that was kind of my solution, is just fill my time up so that my mind doesn't have the chance to get nervous or to think about, all these issues. And then that's kind of at the point where I was until I came across, holding space and the 6-week program where it kind of start to examine these things. And then it kind of almost like unleashed this whole thing of, okay, there are people out there in the world that have similar circumstances to me, who have figured it out, who are able to talk about it openly, who are not ashamed of where they've come from, and they're dealing with it without feeling every day that any moment it could go right back to where the problem was. That they're maintaining in a way that's not a fear-based maintenance program. It's like a confidence-based, like, I'm good. And of course, anything could happen, but even if it does, I'm okay. And I'm not going to be like, victim of my circumstances. So, and the whole time too, I think, and we've discussed this at length, is like the roles that my parents played in my life. I had my mom and my dad. So my dad was the anti-hero and my mom was the hero. And now looking back at this point in my life, it's like, my mom was my hero in a lot of ways, but she also had a lot of her own issues and a lot of her own demons. And some of the things she, told me and made me feel weren't that great for me ultimately. And it's like, how do you square someone being your everything, but also being the cause of a lot of stress and anxiety on her own, And so I've been dealing with a lot of that. And especially as an adult, I would call my mom every single day, asking her for advice about boyfriends, asking her for advice about what I should do at work, and, taking it as like God's word. And at the same time, knowing that her relationships and her work life were never that great to begin with, or her track record in certain things were not that strong. But like her being my person, I just ignored those signs and would just take everything she said as what I should do. So figuring out the roles now as a person who can take care of herself and not need somebody to be there to support like I was as a kid. And it's now figuring out what the new role is. So what role do I play in my own life, and what role do my parents play in my life, and what role do boyfriends play in my life, and what are their jobs and what are my jobs for myself. And that's been kind of where I've been at in the last few months, is rewriting those narratives without, trying to hurt anyone's feelings, but at the same time, not giving all my power away to everybody else. Because I was guilty of doing that and asking advice all the time on things that were my own personal things that I needed to decide for myself. And I was just basically asking, like, what do you think? To everybody, what do you think about, what do you think I should do in my life? I can't imagine doing that now, It's like, they don't know. And then getting mad, like, well, they don't know. They don't believe in me. It's like, well, I don't believe in me. Why am I asking them for what to do? So anyways, so that's been lately. It's re-examining all the relationships that I had as a child and as, growing up, and deciding what I want them to look like now. And also the stories that I wrote in my head based on those relationships back in the past, how I can rewrite them now and start to figure out why I feel the way I feel in certain situations.
Yeah, just that. Just like,
yeah, just that. That was like my 20-minute.
Just some light work.
I
figured. Normal Tuesday. That was a great summation, because I think you started, your story with talking about how even from a young age, you realized there was a disconnect between what you saw going on and what felt right. And so it was almost like a split happened, where it was like, okay, I can file that away here. I can say that I'm okay. And I can learn tactics to calm or like repress the other side of me that's like, this is not okay. This is not okay. And we can do that indefinitely. I think a lot of people do that their whole lives, especially if they learn the tactics that can keep things at bay. And the panic that arises, that you talked about multiple times, that feeling of like, I have to get out of here. I need to escape. Anybody listening can have this takeaway when it comes to anxiety and panic. that claustrophobia feeling and that feeling of needing to run is just the clearest flag you'll ever get that life has become unmanageable and there is something that you feel like you need to be saved from. And it's not the current room typically that you're in, but it's like, where do I feel like I'm suffocating? Where, like, and you'll know, it's like, oh my God, what have I allowed to continue that's slowly suffocating me to the point where suddenly I'm like, I can't be in this room. Like, I can't be here. I can't do this. It's so important because I think people feel it. They don't like the way it feels. And then they learn little tools to calm themselves down in the moment, or they can medicate it. And I'm not anti-medication. I think medication at certain points in a process can be absolutely necessary for helping people ground themselves enough to learn different skill sets.
Yeah.
And some people will just go through that fluctuation of panic, anxiety, panic forever. And they'll just be like, okay, I know the trick to turn it down right now.
Yeah.
But what's really happening is like your internal system is being like, no, there's so many things here that have been slowly killing you and you're not looking at them. And so it's great when you're able to process that and get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm going to get a little bit curious about what's going on here. And you go for the curiosity and then the curtain gets pulled back and you're like, wait a minute. Everything that I thought was one way is actually a different way. I taught myself certain narratives and took them on so that I could survive in the moment. I've had to make heroes out of some people that didn't deserve to be on a pedestal, which, by the way, no one deserves to be on a pedestal. That's going to be like a whole other talk, but like no hero worship, no pedestal. Everybody's human.
Yeah.
No one gets the pedestal. No pedestaling. But sometimes we need that, and it's like we create rescuers and then we turn to them and depend on their advice and that feed in our ear to know what to do, because we don't trust ourselves, because we haven't listened to our own internal navigation system. In fact, we've ignored it and tried to smother it. And so we feel like we need someone else to tell us what's best because we're so disconnected from it ourselves. And it's normal, I think, and that's where codependency comes from. So getting used to feeling like you need someone else to tell you what to do. You need to tell them about everything and get their feedback. And what are you going to do without them? And I think in my own experience too, I mistook that as like closeness. Oh no, we're just really close. My mom and I are really close. Like, and that's like a point of pride, like, no, like we just have a really close relationship. It's like, actually, spiritually you're both, it's like you're a mesh. Like, this isn't, that's dependency.
And there's like a weird, like a disconnect too. In the same situation with my mom, it's like, we're so close, yet I don't feel comfortable telling her true things about me, or I'm afraid to open up my true insecurities, or my, I have a very closeness, but only when I'm giving her positive parts about my life, or I'm playing to a certain thing that I know she's going to appreciate or know she's going to like. And I'm like, just going for that attention constantly. And I'm like, that's closeness, that's love. But also I have all this stuff over here that I would never dare talk to her about, because if that was to come up, I'm going to lose this closeness that we have. But that's the whole point. Like, that's the whole thing that is the confusing part.
Right. And I think so often the thing that gets our attention is when we start mimicking that in other relationships, and it's just, and we're able to, for whatever reason in those, realize like, that's not working. This tool of being like, I am literally just mimicking the same dynamic over here. And does love look like needing someone's praise and their opinion on everything, and then also not talking to them about certain issues or topics ever because it'll blow things up? Is that love? And we operate under these unconscious or these subconscious narratives. And it's like, we end up in other relationships that are like that. And it's like, no, we're super close, but I can't talk to you about these 4 areas because then our relationship will be over. That's off limits. Love is about not upsetting your partner. So you only talk to them about certain things. But we function that way. And we tiptoe around everybody's minefields. And that just becomes normal until one day we're like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. I'm not into it. This relationship is not functioning. And it's like, where did I get this framework from it? And you're like, I got it from, and it's such a mix of what you're saying, where it's like, you have all this love and gratitude for somebody, right? And have looked at so many of their actions as being selfless and like they came through for you and they have like held you down. And then at the same time being like, and you're not perfect. And I adopted all this framework from you. And you don't seem to be able to change or to grow in your own right. And that's not it's so it's like this juxtaposition of being like, I'm grateful and this behavior isn't acceptable to me. I like appreciate you so much and love you, and a new dynamic needs to be formed. I remember when we had this talk too, that both can exist at the same time. It's never white or just black. It's the gray area that we live in where it's like, no, both are true.
Yeah.
Both things that can be so opposite are true. And that's when you're waking up a huge part of it too, where it's like, wait a second, I can love you and I can hate you, or dislike you. I can think that you're amazing and feel so disappointed in the way these things happened. And I think the hallmark of how those relationships change is that the other person is open enough to receive that and also know both are true. Okay, my daughter really does love me and respect me, and she's caught up to me as far as growth goes and knowing best. And in fact, has probably surpassed me, which is weird and a different dynamic. But if I'm open to it, what can we learn from each other and how can we change? And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you're going to be met with all of their stuff that they haven't unpacked and a lack of openness. And that's when friction can occur, which I know is something that you've experienced and have continued to persevere through it. But your journey with that part of confronting it and wanting to heal it and make it better, you were met with some resistance there.
Yeah, it sucks. It continues to suck. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I tell a lot of people this when they ask. I get a lot of people, especially lately, that have come out of the woodwork a little bit, and like from high school, and people who I've known for a long time that kind of know me on like a superficial level. They have seen something, I guess, through Facebook or through social media or through just talking, casually, that there's something different. And people have been reaching out and saying like, what have you been doing that's changed, or what's going on? Like, I see you post about self-care a lot. Like, tell me more about that, and kind of interested in hearing about it. And I feel like that comes from exactly what you're saying. Two things can exist at the same time. And it's like, I'm struggling and I'm going through all this conflict, and I'm having more fights with people that I care about more than I ever have in my life. However, I'm still getting stronger and more positive feedback through those conflicts. And just because you're fighting, I used to think like, if you're fighting with somebody, that means that something's going wrong, and it's probably going wrong with you. Like, you're seeing something wrong, or you're doing something wrong, or, something's, and I don't pretend to be like, oh, I'm above everyone else. So if there's 3 people who are mad at you from separate things, it's probably you are doing something wrong, has been always my mentality. So I feel like, like, look at yourself, during the situation. But at the same time, it's like, when I started having these conversations with my mom, it was very much met with, well, if you question anything that I did as a mother, then you hate me. You don't love me. You never loved me. If you have these questions, or if you have a concern about something that happened when you were a kid, then we can't have a relationship today. And at first I thought, okay, that's fair. When you're with your family, it's like unconditional, no matter what, you got to just put up with it. But then when we had started talking and I started really like listening to myself, it's like the condition that I'm giving up is loving myself and trusting myself when I'm unconditionally letting you treat me this way, or whatever. And it's like, unconditionally loving yourself, you can't unconditionally love someone else if there's a mistreatment, or in your own mind. Like, even if it's not a mistreatment in a traditional sense, if you feel like you're not getting something, the way that you need it, you got to trust yourself that that's fair.
Yeah.
And I never did before. I never thought like, I deserve an answer to this, or, why can't we talk about this? Like, I never felt like I deserved those types of things until I really started to respect myself more and think, no, that's a fair request. I want to know if my parents are married, I want to know what happened when I was 8. Like, why did that happen? And there's one situation that like became like a kind of a big roadblock between my mom and I, or like an eye-opening experience. And I remember telling you about it. And that kind of like was the domino that fell, was this situation specifically that kind of like opened up this whole can of worms. But I'm very grateful for it. But I I was going through, I've been going to Integrate Wellness Center, which is a network spinal chiropractor.
We'll be
And
interviewing Sharina on here too. Side note, look at
yeah,
Integrate Wellness Center. They're great.
yeah. And basically, if you're not familiar, which I wasn't at the time, basically it's chiropractic work, but it's slower. You go a few times a week, in my case at least. Basically, it helps you connect your body to your mind. And I didn't know really what I was going to experience. I was just kind of interested and being curious about lots of different self-care tools. I'd heard good things, so I was like, yeah, I'd try it. And basically, you're laying on a massage table, and Dr. Sharina is touching your back, your spine. And, that's all I thought it was. But after going for like a month, I started to really get relaxed when I was going there. I started to really start to open my mind and start thinking about things. And it's almost like a meditative state for me. And I went in one day and I started thinking about this memory that I had when I was like 8 years old. And it was same thing what we were just talking about, a panic attack that I had at an Italian restaurant in Hollywood, Florida. I remember just crying my eyes out. I just was in this restaurant and I just wanted to go home so badly. And I was just like hysterical. And my mom and my dad were there. And my mom was so embarrassed, and rightfully so. I mean, I'm not a parent, but if I was, having a kid just like hysterically scream in the middle of the restaurant, I cannot imagine being a positive, great experience. So, when we got home from the restaurant, I had this baby blankie that I had since I was like born. I think I was in the hospital when I had it. And I, kept it every night, and I slept with it every night. And my mom took it and said, if you're going to act like a baby, then you're not going to have your baby stuff anymore. We're done with the baby stuff. You need to like grow up. And so she ripped the blanket in half, like dramatically in half, and threw it in the dumpster. And I had never thought about that memory like ever again from then forward. And my dad, that night went into the dumpster, got it out, and like got one of the people he worked with, like one of the women that worked at his office, to like sew it back together. So I actually still have the blanket, and it's completely like just ripped in half, but it's like, I still have it as a memory. But that whole memory I had not thought about as problematic. I just thought of it, I didn't think about it at all, and until this moment I was laying on the table just like crying, because I was like, oh my God, that was weird. Like, that's something that if it was to happen to someone else, I would be like, whoa, that's not normal. Something happened there. Something deeper is going on. Than like, people don't just do that. And so I brought it up to my mom. I was in person with her. I went to visit her, and she had said like, oh, you're being a little quiet today. Is there something on your mind? And I, said, yeah, I had this flashback almost where I thought about this memory where you ripped my blanket in half, and I was having a panic attack. I'm confused as to why that was like the way that you reacted to that, because it took me a long time to also allow myself to feel like having panic is not my fault.
Yeah.
Having a panic attack is something I couldn't control, especially at that age when I was just so confused about what I was even feeling. And it wasn't me acting up or misbehaving or being disruptive. It was like a physical issue going on, mental issue. And my mom got very, very upset, like super just, how dare you bring that up? And that almost became like the moment I was like, whoa, like we can't even talk about this, out of all the things. Like, I deserve and I need to get through this stuff. I need to understand what your mindset was, and I need you to understand where my mindset was for me to move on from this. And it just became a thing of like total shutdown, just like, nope, can't talk about it. I was a good mother to you. You even questioning me on this is a problem. And, if you feel that way, we cannot have a relationship. And, normally, and that's not the first time something like that has happened or that threat has been leveled, but in the past I would be like, okay, I'll back off. That was my notice of like, okay,
Yeah.
I took it too far.
Yeah.
I asked too many questions. I needed to relax because I don't want her to get upset. And this time I was like, okay, well, if that's what you want, then that's what it's going to be. And from then, that point on, I mean, haven't really, we've spoken, we talk, but we used to talk every single day for, at least 15 minutes a day, if not an hour a day, to we speak like once a week for 10 minutes maybe. And it's been a huge change. And, it does upset me, but at the same time, I feel we're making progress, even though we're separate and apart. And I don't know where she's at mentally or how she feels about the whole thing. But every day that goes by, I feel like, okay, I'm trusting myself more. I'm understanding things about the past more. And things that used to upset me, and I thought, like, I don't know why this is upsetting me. And it would upset me more because I didn't know why I was getting so affected by it. I'm understanding why I'm affected by things, and it makes it so much easier. And I remember telling you one time during a session, I had listened to a podcast about a little girl who had gone to like a camp for anxiety. And she was like my age when I had anxiety really bad, like 8 years old. And her parents took her to this camp, and they like would do all these like workshops and drills and stuff for different triggers, and it would like be a face your fear type of thing. And she ended up getting through a lot of her anxiety, and I just cried because I was like, I wish someone would have taken me to a camp like that, or taken my anxiety seriously, instead of making it seem like I'm a problem, or like I'm just being disruptive to be disruptive. Like it's a thing that I could have overcome in that way. And I felt like, oh, I'm just so grateful for that girl to have like her parents like look at her and understand her. But I'm like, I'm fine, like I don't know why I'm affected by this, and so like now seeing that, like, oh, because my parents, and not really to their fault or that they did something wrong, but they didn't recognize it as what it was, I think. And it was something that I wish I had a little bit more help with, and I
Yeah.
think my parents, they saw me, and my mom specifically saw me as a high functioning person. I wasn't getting bad grades, or I wasn't, dumb, and I was reading and I was doing all the things that like well put together people do, and I had friends. But I also felt like I wanted to acknowledge that something was wrong too.
Right.
It can be at the same time. You can be high functioning and doing good things, but also you can have a major issue.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm coming to now in my life. Like as a kid, like, yeah, there was two things going on. And even now, I can be a high functioning adult with a lot of great things going on and good things for me. And I'm supporting myself, and I'm, making progress in my career, but I also am dealing with major issues in my personal life, and, having like things come up and anxiety and all these things going on that I'm dealing with. But it doesn't mean that, oh, well, she's got anxiety, so the rest of her, life doesn't matter, or the rest of her accomplishments are, irrelevant.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's like combining the two worlds. And I think it's interesting now at this time on a larger level, on a macro scale, that I think a lot of people, again, and part of waking up is that a duality that both exist. Right. And so even with what's happening in our world, it's like with lots of finger pointing, it's like, wait a second, this happened, it's real. And so is this, even if they are opposites, both can exist. And I think people have a really hard time wrapping their mind around that. It's like, no, this person did a great thing. They're also doing this thing that's really shitty. Both exist. And
Yeah.
acknowledging both doesn't take away value from either one.
Yeah.
That's still equally shitty, and that's still equally great. And it's like our minds want to polarize things so that they're easier to categorize and then respond to. So it's like, well, no, if you did that, then you're this kind of person. It's like, nope, the one thing on either level, on either end of the scale, doesn't define you.
Yeah.
It's as a whole. And we have a hard time, I think, integrating that, because you're right. There's so many, and that's where you get terms like high functioning alcoholic. It's like, wait a second, what? It's like,
Yeah.
like, so
Yeah.
you can go to work or hold a job, or sometimes not even be able to do that, but like you get up each day, but are dependent on, wait, what? It's like, that doesn't make sense to me. you can have the facade or be able to do something successfully and also be just decomposing inside and not looking at those issues. And I think what you're describing is normal. I think that is health to me, is being able to be high functioning, to do these things, to have growth, and to simultaneously be able to take a really good look at yourself and your story and ask which parts are not in alignment with you living your best life and which parts are holding you back and are not healthy, and not throwing blame at people, but actually working through it and inviting others in to be able to have the opportunity to work through it with you. To me, that's like health, because none of us are exempt from having things we need to look at. And when
Yeah.
we find the place in life where we're able to be stable enough to do both, not to have things shut down and be like, I'm going to wither in this or just focus on it because it's, so heavy, but to know that there will always be things. And the more we grow, the more things will be revealed that have been buried under each layer. And that's okay, because it doesn't mean that we're off course, and it doesn't mean everything else is going to stop moving. Like, nope, I can continue through that. And I think that is what health is. I'm Katie Kovaleski, and you've been listening to the SASS podcast, where science meets spirituality with a sassy twist. You can follow the SASS podcast through Instagram, Facebook, and our website using the links in the show notes. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube and subscribe. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review. If you would like to continue this conversation, visit our blog to join in on the deep dive for this episode, where we explore this topic in more detail. Join me next week for another sassy conversation.